Welcome to this episode of Harvey County Talk. I'm your host, Lance Gormley. Our sponsor for this episode is Conradi Insurance Group. Conradi Insurance Group provides personalized, industry-specific recommendations and guidance based on years of experience in every facet of the insurance industry. I have personally and know many people who continue to choose Conradi Insurance for their business and home insurance needs. If you're looking around, maybe need a change, or you just want a trustworthy and reliable group of people to take care of any of your insurance needs, give them a call at 888-283-0096. Remember, that's 888-283-0096. And you can look them up online at conradiinsurance.com. That's CONRADE insurance.com. And even better, they're locally owned and operated. Conradi Insurance is located at 129 East Broadway in Newton, Kansas. Our guest on the program is the Honorable Judge Richard Walker. How are you doing today, Judge?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Doing well.
Good. Thank you for coming on the program.
Absolutely.
We did have a time where we got an audio interview together, and I wanted to do a video interview, and now that we have an opportunity to do one, you graciously agreed to come back on the program. I would say that of all the interviews that I've done, I really enjoyed ours a lot.
Good.
I've always been a fan.
The alternatives.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes I think it comes down to what you enjoy really listening to, and I've always been a fan of law and just being involved in politics, obviously, and of course, then when I found out all of these things about you I didn't know previously, it just kept making me want to just ask more questions and find out more. And that's when I say, judging by the interviews that I've given, yours specifically left me with wanting to ask a lot more questions.
Absolutely, that's fine.
So, okay, a recap. Some of the things you've been a lifelong Newtonian.
Yes,
or North Newtonian.
Well, except for a couple of years in Washington D.C., but other than that, here the whole time.
Yeah, and so you were born here in Newton.
Born and raised,
and that was at the old hospital.
Yeah, oh yes,
right. Yes. So that. And then just kind of walk, for those that didn't hear the interview before, kind of just walk me through your childhood of Newton. Now, you were born here in Newton. I know that you had mentioned that your parents were here from Newton and maybe generational, so just give me a take on that again.
Well, my parents both lived here. My father came here very young from Burlington, Iowa. His father was a car dealer, lost his job there, and basically just started moving west, stopping in every town, asking whether they needed a car salesman or not at the Hudson Essex dealership. And the Hudson Essex dealer in Newton said, yeah, I can take somebody on. So he then was raised here from about age 4 on. My mother was born and raised here. Her father was a biology professor at Bethel. He and his wife met here as students at Bethel College, and then my mother was raised in North Newton, she and her brother, and my grandfather taught biology for 40 years at Bethel. And then my parents went to Bethel. They knew each other growing up. In fact, he used to carry her groceries out at the Piggly Wiggly store in Newton at 8th and Main. And 7th and Main, excuse me. And but it was really after they went to college together, but they really didn't start dating until after he'd left. He was a highway patrolman, and she was a school teacher in Gossel. And basically, she only got to leave town 1 out of every 4 weekends. Couldn't leave Gossel because for those evil other cities like Newton, even though she'd grown up there. And so they started dating and married. And then I was born about 8 years after they married. He was almost killed on the highway patrol, so I almost wasn't. But
wow.
So
well, yeah. Tell me. See, that's something here. Tell me this story. So your dad was a trooper.
Yes, he was. And, he was one of the early troopers. He was a classmate of Al Dewey, who was the KBI agent who investigated the Clutter murders and the In Cold Blood story. There were only 35 troopers in the whole state of Kansas. He was one of the original. The Highway Patrol was only formed in 1936, and he went on in 1937. So he was very early trooper, one of only 35 in the state. He had 8 counties in western Kansas he was solely responsible for. He was working traffic in Greensburg, Kansas. He had stopped a car for running a stop sign in Greensburg. It turned out it was the president of the Kansas Senate who he'd stopped. For running the stop sign. While he was chatting with him, a gasoline transport truck was coming the other way. The driver went to sleep, woke up just as he sideswiped the car. Dad was thrown about 50 feet out into a field. His arm was almost torn off. He jumped up on the running board of the car, which is probably the only thing that saved him. But he was kind of rolled between the car and the gasoline transport truck, and they didn't think he was going to live. But as it so happened, there was a doctor in Wichita who was kind of a groupie of just hung around with law enforcement. That was his thing. He was obsessed with law enforcement, and so he drove to Greensburg, threw Dad in the back of his car, took him to St. Francis Hospital, and because he knew he had gas gangrene, and he said that people in Greensburg, he's not going to live the rest of the week unless we get him there. And so they took him there, and they didn't cut his arm off because they didn't think he could survive the surgery. So they saved him. The bottom line is they saved him, but his arm was always 1 inch shorter than the other, his left arm. So they always had to have custom-made shirts.
Right.
So I was born 8 years after that happened. My folks had only been married about 6 months when my mother was almost widowed because of this.
Incredible. And then, so did he just decide at that point in time that being a state trooper wasn't for him?
He went on back on the patrol for a while, but then I always asked him, why did you leave? Because growing up, I thought, what a great job being on the highway patrol. And I asked him why he quit being on the highway patrol, and he made it very graphically. He said, well, I got tired of pushing heads back through windshields.
Well, yeah, that's interesting because I think we're just now waking up to that as a society when it comes to those who serve us in that way. That that's a tough job, and there's a lot that's going on there.
And it's you see the worst side of humanity. You see a lot of really heart-wrenching stuff out on the highway. You really do. So he was offered a job on Main Street at what was called Regeer Loan and Abstract Company, and so he left there, worked for that company for 50 years. So.
That's incredible. So you just keep unpacking this. Okay, so well, you're born, right? And then obviously their intention is to just settle down, make the home front take place.
Home.
And so then you had talked to me about something in the past I thought was unique, where the location you were living at.
Well, yeah, I lived right next door to the school that I went to. That was Cooper, the annex. I went there, although I went through 5th grade. But then we lived at 222 East 7th, which is right next to Cooper. It's also catty corner from the Ross Flour Mills, which had no pollution control devices on them at that point. And turned out I was horribly allergic to wheat dust.
In Kansas, of all places.
Yes, exactly. In fact, I could not really even go out in the country because I had terrible asthma growing up. I've outgrown that, but it turned out, in fact, they sent me to an allergy clinic in Oklahoma City, and they were asking, well, does he have any exposure to wheat dust? Oh, yeah. And they said, oh, that's
clearly the problem.
That is clearly the problem. So we moved out to the north end of town and got away from all the wheat dust because my mom couldn't even hang stuff out on the clothesline because the wheat dust would just, with prevailing south winds, would just coat all the laundry out on the line.
Well, I wonder how many people have a like memory of that, because granted that's an older area of town and an established area, and people live next to where their jobs are, and transportation is limited. So there's a lot of houses in and around that area. I wonder what back when you were a kid, if they can remember other people on the listening.
If people grew up on 7th and 8th Street, I'm sure they would remember it, because you could just see they have to turn the wheat to keep it from rotting in the mills, and that generates tons of dust. And now they have dust collectors that settles that out, so it's not a problem. But then it was just blown up in the air, and it would just settle all over the neighborhood. And so people with those kinds of allergies, they'd have had a problem. And it was I can remember many, many nights not being able to, having to sit up because I couldn't lie down, and had terrible asthma. So
struggled as a child with
I really
days.
did. And it meant that a lot of things that I couldn't do as far as running sports, and although I did play baseball, but if I had to run the bases, of course I wasn't that great a hitter, but if I had to run the bases, I'd be winded I'd have to use an inhaler to be able to finish out the rest of the game.
Well, looking back, do you feel that just stopping in your childhood here, trying to understand who you are and what made you who you are, did the lack of being able to go out in I'm thinking what age you are at this point in time would be when you're running around the yard with the other kids on bikes and stuff.
Right.
Well, if you're not able to really do that, I would say you're kind of pushed inside. Did that change maybe what you chose to, like, did you read more? I mean, what was kind of, because we're talking like pre-TV here at this point, correct?
Well,
pretty close. I mean, they didn't have shows
there was
for
one
kids,
channel. Channel 12 was the first one. I remember that. So we did have TV there for some of my early years. Really, life changed when we moved north and got away from the environmental issues and developed. I had a rescue inhaler at that point, so I just knew my limits. And no, I could get out and play. I played on a middle school football team, and I played several years of Little League baseball, so I just had to watch myself, be careful. Gym class was hard, particularly when they made us run laps. So
so you just did it, but you just made sure you stayed within your limitations.
Yeah, I just had to stay within limits. So
that's it always.
I wasn't an invalid by any means.
No. Like, well, I don't know. I just imagine when like being a child with some complications in your youth does change some of the things you can do. So then what does that push? Where did that push you,
Well, I was always a reader because my parents were both readers. I mean, we always had lots of books and magazines around the house, and those kind of things were, intellectual pursuits were encouraged. My folks went to concerts, and my dad was really, we did a lot of traveling. I had an uncle who lived in Virginia, and we'd go back there and we'd stop at the Hermitage in Nashville and every historic site. I've been to almost every Civil War battlefield there is, and a lot of Revolutionary War battlefields. So my folks made trips into historical trips that we could stop at things, and that was really piqued my interest in a lot of things.
Educational.
So, absolutely, it was.
When I was growing up, that's what our vacations were, was to go to some battlefield or something like that. Education had something to do with the history. Yeah.
Sure.
And it's interesting because, like you, I'm the same and still being interested in those things. So it carries on to, your adulthood life and stuff. Kind of just something happens to direct your path. So just a little bit deeper on the family. I know if somebody listens to the last interview, they will know kind of what you did. But did you feel like growing up that you had a tight-knit family?
Like I was an only child, and my only close relative was my mother's brother, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, was a naval intelligence officer, and it was great to go back to visit him because he had access to everything on the military bases back there. I mean, he could go anywhere that admirals could go, and so we did all kinds of. But no, I had no other family around, none whatsoever, because my father had a sister, but she lived in California. She was a nurse out there, and we'd sometimes go out there, but had no family around here whatsoever. We were pretty much a three-person unit.
Yeah. Yeah, so that makes it tight.
Very, very tight,
because
and
you don't
no
have
place to
that.
hide.
Yes, and it's interesting that you mentioned that where there's so many people in your family but living in different locations, especially given the time, probably made it more difficult to communicate, get back and forth. It's not like you had a phone or you could Skype somebody, right? I mean, you're getting a phone call and that's costing money, type of a thing, or getting there.
People wrote letters back in those days.
Lots of letters. Yeah, right.
Letters and postcards. Absolutely. That's how we communicated.
Yeah, that's.
So I'd write to my cousins. I'd write to my uncle. And then we'd take trips out there and an occasional phone call. But it wasn't the kind of instant communication at all that we have today.
So, and it's just interesting how that has changed and allowed for people to be able to communicate much more frequently, easier than what it was in the past, I would think, and assume in that way. There's no sitting and writing a letter anymore, it seems like.
Well, but when you do, it has a tremendous impact, because I tell my students that when I teach classes, the most powerful force in the universe is a handwritten, stamped envelope sent first class, because you get all kinds of junk mail.
Yeah.
But a personal letter.
First class.
Wow.
Right.
You open that, you read that, you remember that.
Yeah.
That's how to have an impact.
Yeah, and you can keep it.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
I do that. When people write me letters, I keep them in a box. I don't know why. I just have them from forever ago. But cards, boxes, I collect things like that. But so during high school, once again, I kind of know what you did. Did you enjoy high school? Did you enjoy just the aspect, or were you like, man, I cannot wait to get out of this place?
Oh no, I won't say I loved it, but I enjoyed it, because again, I was in kind of a small group. I was on the debate squad every year, and that's kind of a small, close-knit group of people, because we met every day, we worked together, we went on the weekends, we went out to debate tournaments, and then we had kind of a group. That was back when Latin was taught at Newton High School, and I was in the last Latin 3 class. I took Latin 1, 2, and 3 from Bonnie Salanders, and loved it. And there were a group of us who were very tight-knit, would get together and drink Cokes and meet with Ms. Salanders after class, and it was just, and then she'd invite us over to her house, and we'd have Latin parties at her house, and so I was involved in those kinds of things. I was involved in sports, but I was involved with the we called it I can't even remember what we called it, the group, a group of men who supported the teams that we wore coats and ties to the games, if you can believe that.
Right,
and
right,
dressed
right.
up
Yeah,
to show our support for the teams, but obviously didn't play any sports. But
with those things, like you're talking about Latin and these things that have used to be taught that aren't taught anymore. When you were doing that, were you doing it with the mindset that this is going to help me somehow in the future with what I want to do, or did you just take it out of pure enjoyment? Like
both really. I enjoyed it, and primarily because Bonnie Salanders was one of the best teachers I've ever had. I mean, it wasn't just I understood the importance of Latin, and my parents certainly supported that, but I took it, and she made it interesting because she traveled the world. She was a Fulbright scholar, and she had pictures from everywhere she'd been, and she integrated all her experiences into the teaching of Latin. She'd said, now here's the forum, and here's some of my pictures, and here's some of the stories that relate to that. And it was so it was more than just learning what people call a dead language, although it's the root of so many things we do.
All languages, basically.
There's so many words, even if you don't know them, you can say, oh, that comes from the Latin so-and-so. And so I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the group. I enjoyed the teacher. And I also knew that it was good academic preparation for future work, particularly if law that I decided to go into. So.
Well, and that's you're graduating from high school. So, of course, was it just a known thing? I might ask this question last, but was it just a known thing in your family, like you're going to college, you wanted to go to college, that it was just as you were finishing up your junior, senior year, just wasn't any question? You were going to go to college.
There was no question.
But where were you going to go?
I was going to do that because I wanted the intellectual experience. Now, they were both Bethel grads, and my grandparents were both Bethel grads, and they said to me, now, we don't want you to feel obligated to go to Bethel. And in fact, I did look at a number of different alternatives, but then I met with the history faculty out at Bethel, and I really, really liked the history faculty out there. And so it was an easy choice. It wasn't just because, well, that's a family tradition. It was because I really liked what they were offering out there, and it meshed very nicely with what my developing interest in history. So,
and so why history? I know. So you're going to college. You choose history to do that. Were you thinking at that time, I'm going to go to college for 4 years and I'm going to become a history teacher?
I really thought that, yes, once I got into it. Now, I actually waited. I didn't declare a major until I was a junior. So I took a wide variety of different things, but it was always pretty clear that history was what made me the most comfortable. So I declared a history major. And yes, when I was a senior at Bethel, I was thinking I'd go on to history graduate school somewhere. And I sat down with my professors and they said, yeah, we think you'd do fine. The big problem is there are just no jobs out there. We have, and they showed me a listing in some of the academic journals and some of the academic listings that they were aware of for history professors with PhDs.
Yeah.
And they said, nationwide here, 7 or 8 positions.
Yeah.
And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of candidates for those positions. So they said, yeah, we'll support you, but we have to be candid. It's a rough world out there for academic positions right now, even PhD positions. And if you only have a master's degree, I mean, you might get on as a teaching assistant someplace, but you have no chance of a regular faculty position with a history degree right now. We hope that changes. Yeah. But we just want to be candid with you. And so I sat down and I had a heart-to-heart, particularly with my parents. And my dad had always wanted to go to law school, but the economics of it never worked out for him. So, in fact, one of the stories, he had money saved up for college because he worked his whole life. But his money was in a bank that went under during the Depression, and he lost a big chunk of his college money. Just bank was open one day, his money was there. Next day, everything was gone. All his college savings were just wiped out. So it took him 5 years to get through college because he had to work an extra year. So he really wanted to go on, but the economics of it. And so he said, well, look, why don't you take a year law school, see if you like it, see if it fits what you want to do. If you don't, you can figure something else out. If you do, you can finish your degree, and then because there were good law jobs available at that time. So I decided to do that. I took first year of law school. I hated it, but I was also working full-time, almost full-time at a radio station instead of going to law school. And my interest in politics was kind of piqued because the summer before law school, I spent full-time working for a gubernatorial candidate at his office down in Wichita, Kent Frizzell, who was running against Bob Docking, the incumbent governor. So I spent the summer of 1970 basically traveling the state, accompanying the gubernatorial candidate, and that really got me interested in politics. And my dad had always been interested in politics. We'd go down to the county offices at night and watch the counting of votes on election nights, and he'd talk to the candidates, and I'd met a lot of the candidates because he knew everybody, and because he'd been on Main Street, and he was actually involved in politics as a precinct committeeman, and just he'd been chairman for a lot of candidates and treasurer for a lot of candidates, so he knew lots and lots of people. And so I already kind of was interested in that. And then when I really got my feet wet in the summer of 1970, I was in law school. I decided to run for the legislature against the incumbent here. And so I spent time my second year in law school taking classes 3 days a week and spending the rest of the week campaigning. So it was...
Oh, I'm here to tell you, that is not easy to do. No. I know your pain. And I would think that during the time, I look at I'm a new grad, right? So I look at the way that education is taught today and how easy, I'm going to say easy, or how much less difficult it is today to be able to go and consume the information needed. You can just do it from your house with
Yes.
your laptop. Your situation, you're going to a library, you're going to get those books. You're there. I mean, it's an entire different education system today. Pros and cons.
Well, there were
aside.
no computers back
yeah.
when I was in law school. Well, there was one. There was a research computer in the law library, but only the members of the law review, the top people, could have access to it. Nobody had computers. They didn't really exist in anything except the most primitive forms.
So I ran while going to school, and then it would be way more difficult for you to have accomplished that than ever me, because I'm not having to walk back and forth to a library. I mean, just think about all the steps. And I personally think about the amount of time that would have taken you. I mean, you were basically from sun up to sundown doing the grind. You were doing law school, which I'm sure was not easy. And then you're coming back and running for an election. So there's just no time in there to do any. So you must, I mean, I didn't know any of this about you when we did the first interview, and it just made me think about like that must have been a real passion for you, like a real passion. You say the desire to be involved, to want to go and serve on somebody's campaign. These things, you're not getting like paid for any of this stuff, right? You're just you're doing it. In fact, you're investing heavily in your future through skin in the game, right? And your own doing the thing. So what do you think like drove you to want to do this? Just the simple aspect of, well, I was interested in government and politics, and this is kind of where I was going, and I wanted to see about being involved locally and getting elected. What was the drive? What do you can hone in as the passion behind that?
Well, first of all, having spent 1970 working for a gubernatorial candidate, meeting all kinds of people, and actually before that, in 1968, I'd been a congressional intern for the summer back in Washington, D.C., spent the summer back there. So I got a little taste of that, although was a whole different kind of thing. But I got to meet a number of members of the Kansas congressional delegation and all that. So I already had my interest up, and then in 1970, working full-time for a gubernatorial candidate. And really what made the difference when I was in law school was my mother said, well, look, we've had a 20-year candidate, 20-year incumbent in the legislature. He really needs to be taken out. And a lot of people had told me that they just felt it was time for a change. And she said, and if you run, I will hand address all the envelopes for you, and I'll recruit a team of women, and we'll get all the envelopes in. And I said, that's a pretty strong inducement, and I was kind of leaning that way anyway. And I had one of my best friends also did the same thing up in Johnson County, a fellow named Joe Hoagland, who's now a cattle baron. And quite a story about him. In fact, I just did an interview for him for the Kansas Oral History Project. And he's now an international businessman. Almost ran for Senate against Pat Roberts. But any event, so a couple of other of my friends did the same thing. We're in law school, decided to do it, and we all made the commitment to spend as much time as it took. So I went to law school 3 days in Lawrence, then I drove home, and it got to be a thing where once you start doing it, you don't want to lose, and so you put in what time is needed to do it. And so I was going door to door. And I remember in the summer of 1972 when I ran, we had a whole string of days where it was 108 and below. So I'm going door to door in a suit and tie in 108-degree heat. I got they thought I was crazy or I was really committed, because I got offers, a lot of lemonade offers and iced tea offers.
To come inside just for a little bit, because you look like you need some air,
So, and once you start doing that, and see, now it's not that uncommon to do it, but back then, nobody did that.
Yeah.
Nobody did that. No, my folks couldn't remember anybody ever having coming to their door asking for their vote. So, it just didn't happen. And so word got around that I was doing that, and nobody else was doing that. And so it just was I got lots of encouragement from people. I got lots of individual contributions. Ads were cheap. I could buy a radio ad for 97 cents. And so it one thing spiraled into another, and I just worked hard, and it was very intoxicating to win the primary election. And then my opponent ran a write-in campaign against me in the general. The mayor of Newton ran a write-in campaign against me in the general, and we had a well-known Democrat candidate in the general election. So there were 4 of us in the general election in 1972, and fortunately, I was able to get 51% of the votes.
See, and that's just amazing. And I was gonna ask about that. I look at the nature of politics in general today, and it seems that it repels more people than it attracts. And that's not necessarily the mechanism, but more the people that participate in the choices that they make when engaging people in policy. And okay, so with all that, do you feel at that time that it was the same thing? Like people were participating in the same type of behavior?
No.
So something has changed over time. Like, what was kind of some of the? Give me like what was like the worst that somebody would try to pull in a campaign? Like, what's the worst thing somebody would say about you? Comparatively to like today, where people will say anything about you.
The big knock on me was lack of experience. I was, a college graduate who was in law school.
That was the attack on
thing.
you.
Yes, we have a 20. On the one hand, we have a 20-year incumbent who knows the legislature, knows everybody up there, has lots of experience, is a local businessman, has had a payroll, has been involved in lots of organizations. On the other hand, we have a young kid who, what's he ever done? He doesn't have any experience. What does he know?
And during that time, that would be hard.
That was a legitimate criticism, even though. The incumbent didn't run a campaign. He just thought everybody knows me. And here's this kid. In fact, I went to him. I don't know whether I told this in the earlier interview. I went to him in the spring of 1972 and said, look, I want to run for the legislature. But you've been there a long time. Everybody knows you. My family knows you. You're my doctor's brother-in-law. I really don't want to do anything mean. I would like to do this. If you say this, run and say this is going to be my last term, I will give up the seat after seeking this last term. Then I will not file, but I will then file in 1974. And he said, I'm just going to run until somebody beats me. And I said, okay. And I went out and filed a few days later after that because he said, no, I'm not going to make any promises. I'm not going to, I'll run as long as I can. In fact, he then ran against me in 1974. He ran against me in 1976. He ran against Jim Gilmore, who took my place when I went to Washington in 1978. He ran against Karen Griffiths in 1980. My father was elected in 1982. He ran against him in 82. He ran against him in 84. He ran against him in 88.
So he ran and lost 8 times or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Once you're done, once you've served a long time, people know you.
It's not that they think you did a bad job.
It's hard to come back because people remember. Oh, well, he's had it for 20 years.
Yeah.
So
well, that's man, that would have been an interesting time to see. I would have loved to watch that campaign go down because you have the kid, right? That's doing good, that's rocking it. That's
I was local. People knew me. I've been
your
involved
family,
in a lot of stuff.
Your dad. I mean, you're a local graduate. It's not like you're native, not native to where you're at. And then you have somebody else who's been doing this for a minute. And when you put those two, it's kind of like, wow, that's a hard choice. And then coupled with running a write-in campaign and just continuously coming back and back and back and back. And it's like, wow,
Well, I had a number of different things. My family was known, born and raised here. the incumbent didn't do anything when I ran against him in the primary. He just thought, everybody knows me. Everybody will vote for me. This kid isn't going to cause me any trouble. He didn't do anything until the election was on a Tuesday. On Saturday and on Monday, he ran full-page ads in the Newton paper listing every bill he'd ever introduced and saying, here's my record. Why would you vote for anybody else, essentially?
Yeah, look at what I've done for you.
Yeah, and my campaign was over.
Yeah.
I had done everything. I'd gone door to door for weeks and weeks and weeks. I'd sent my mailings out. I'd had radio ads, radio silence on the other side.
Yeah.
Nothing at all. Nothing. Except one of his best friends kept calling me and calling my dad, my parents, saying, oh, it's so unfair. Everybody should just honor those 20 years. Just give him one more term. Get Richard to pull out of the race. And I said, he makes his own decisions, and we're not going to do that. And but that was the only real effort. Was one of his one of Ernie's, the incumbent's best friends, tried to get me to pull out of the race, which wasn't happening. But it was really a confluence of a whole number of things. Both that people knew generally who I was, knew my family. The fact he didn't do anything, just kind of, I think, arrogantly assumed the office was his as long as he wanted it. And the primary is not the whole electorate.
Yeah.
I went door to door. I had a printout. In fact, I had cards with all the names of the Republican doors, and so I just went to those doors.
Yeah.
And targeting those people, and it was still close. I mean, he had actually, on election night, he had actually beaten me everywhere, except we both lived in the same home precinct. And I won our home precinct 2-1.
That's
and that was the difference in the election. My home precinct and his home precinct, which was very large, it's been split now into two. He actually beat me out in the country. He beat me most places in the city, but I beat him 2-1 in our home precinct, and it was large, and that was the difference in the voting.
That's an interesting end to the tale.
But that didn't come in until 2 o'clock in the morning.
Which you're
until
down
2
there
o'clock in the morning,
counting probably.
I'm thinking I'm losing. Because everything else has come in except this huge precinct, which is my home precinct, and it's his home precinct. And right now I'm losing. At 2 o'clock, when they come in, I'm winning.
See, and that is
crazy.
Amazing, isn't it?
And it wasn't close.
Yeah. And that's back, I say back in the day, right? But that's when people used to go out and vote the day of or a couple of days. There wasn't this early
I don't even think
there wasn't any of that.
I don't recall that there was advance voting. There was absentee voting, sure, but there was not walk-in voting. I haven't voted on election day forever. I always go in one of the first few days that they have the walk-in voting.
Then there's no line. Yeah, it makes it easy.
See, I couldn't vote until I was age 21 because they didn't change the law.
Okay.
Until I was age 20, and I couldn't vote at age 18. But since age 21, I have voted in every general, primary, special, every election. Not school board, city commission, every. I have not missed one single election. Even when I was overseas for a while, I had absentee ballots sent over there. Not missed one.
You have to participate in the process.
That's
what everybody does. It's a civic duty, and we've lost that. But we need to regain that. And I think
they made
it's
it so
totally
much
possible.
easier.
Yeah, you can't make it any easier. Yeah, you can register online. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, for lack of voting online, you can go in 2 weeks prior, at least in our county. Locally here, I'm sure in some instances it's not always the same because of the way it all works and voting laws and whatnot. But so at this stage in the game, you have now, you're not totally graduated with law school yet, but you're elected. So you're going to law school, you're learning the legislature, and shortly after that, you're practicing law. So at this stage in your life, you're an elected official for your 72nd. Is that what it is? Okay. Then this would be like your going into your second term. You've graduated law school. You're probably practicing. What's it look like then? What's your state of mind? There's got to have been an aha moment where you're like, okay, I've graduated with law school. I've been successful and I'm serving my community. What now?
Well, I wasn't very good at practicing law in the sense of the only thing a lawyer has to sell is their time. I wasn't very good at selling my time. I never made much money practicing law because I'd spend all day working on something. I was a terrible timekeeper. I'd spend all day working on something, and then I had to sit down and figure out how much time. So I might spend 8 or 9 hours working, but I could only figure out 3 or 4 billable hours. Well, you can't make a living doing that. And I didn't enjoy retail law. I mean, just having an office open and then having people come in, because for the same reason I got elected, I'd have a lot of people that I knew come in, and you just can't charge them what the time you spend in it, because you think, this person's known me my whole life, and they're really expecting to pay maybe $100, but I put like $300 worth of time in it, so I'm going to charge them $175. Well, I haven't covered my time, but they're paying more than they expected. I was just never very good at the billing part of things. I worked hard. The thing about practicing law is sometimes in order to make money, sometimes you have to take on stuff that you really don't like and really don't want to do, because people need the representation, but you're not them, and you just have to do the best you can to represent them. But I just never felt very comfortable doing that. That's why I much more enjoyed being a judge, because number one, I didn't have to, I had to try to bring justice to both sides. Number two, I didn't have to worry about sending out bills at the end of the month in order to pay my mortgage. Yeah. And there wasn't just the pressure to get clients and solicit business. So it was a much better career choice for me. But,
interesting when we say judge. I know we covered this a little more in depth on the last one, but I guess back to the just process of thinking of what's guiding you through all of this. You're practicing law. You're still in the legislature, but at this time you may not be, right? When the judge, what was the distance between when you decided you didn't want to run anymore and
well, what happened in 1977 was I was contacted by Senator Pearson's office, and I knew his chief assistant back in Washington, and a guy named Jerry Waters, and he called me and asked me if I'd be interested in coming to Washington. And I said, because at that point, first of all, we lost the majority in the legislature for the first time since 1912, and so I went from being actually a committee chairman to being sitting on the back row saying, "What's happening? Does anybody know what's happening?" Because you have, as a minority member of a political body, you really don't have much to say about anything unless you're in the leadership, and there are only a couple of leadership positions in the minority. And so I was depressed about that. Didn't enjoy practicing law. So somebody offers me a job to go to Washington, D.C. and work for a United States senator. Sure.
You're thinking this is where I'm supposed to be.
Well, not necessarily that, but it was just the right time that I was ready to change. So I resigned from the legislature. I sold my house, left my law practice, decided to get married, and moved to Washington, all within a matter of 2 months. Actually, maybe less than that. And so major change, moved back there for a whole variety of things that we don't have time to talk about. I got back there, and Senator Pearson had decided that he wasn't going to run for re-election. I had been recruited with the idea I was going to go work in Washington, and then during the 1978 election, I was going to come back and basically be field manager for Senator Pearson. Well, he decided to retire within a few months after I got back there. Now, I was offered other positions back there, but my wife and I decided we were going to have children first of all, the cost of living in Washington was at least 30 to 40% higher than it was back here, and the pay wasn't that much better. Really, my pay was minimal. You think, oh, big Washington salaries? Well, maybe, but not for congressional staff at that time, anyway. And so, and we were tired of the traffic, tired of the high expense, wanted to raise kids, didn't want to raise them in Washington, D.C., or even we lived actually in a Maryland suburb. And so we decided we were going to come back to Kansas. And the other thing that happened is I'd known Governor Bennett at that time, and he had been defeated in 1978 in the election, but the parole board, the Kansas Parole Board, was about to become full-time, and I asked him if he'd consider appointing me, and he said, sure. So he appointed me to the parole board. He appointed me when he was a lame duck. He'd been defeated, but he still made the appointment. I was one of 3 appointments he made, and the other 2 were rejected by the incoming governor, Governor Carlin, who was a Democrat, but mine was not rejected because I'd worked with Carlin in the legislature. We were good friends. We worked across party lines. Yeah. Even though I was a Republican, he was a Democrat. In fact, then became Speaker of the House. And then governor, he and I, in fact, we still exchanged correspondence. We were good friends, and he ultimately appointed me to the bench in 1985. But so I spent 2 years in Washington, then came back, then went on the parole board for 4 years, and then came back and practiced law for a couple of years. And in 1985, well, actually it was in 84 that I was appointed. January 3 of 85 is when I went on the bench.
So when you got done with the parole board and then came back to practice law, that was for a brief period of time. Were you kind of like, ugh, now I'm back to this?
Well, no, because I was city attorney at that point.
Okay, different type of law.
Art Turner, who'd been city attorney for like 30 years, had gotten quite ill. He developed lung cancer. He was a lifelong smoker. He developed lung cancer and had basically had to quit the law practice. And Jay Newton, who was the city manager at that point, asked me to become city attorney, which was not a full-time position, but that was at that point, Art Turner was a part of Ice Turner and Ice, and so I joined that firm and became city attorney for Newton and Halstead. But I knew I wanted the judge position, and so when it became available when Judge Peterson retired, or actually he was defeated, and but I was not appointed at that time. But then Judge Reed, who was appointed to take his place, decided he didn't really like it, and he was appointed a federal magistrate, and I applied, and Governor Carlin appointed me at that time in 1984. So
1984, you've been, you started being a judge for the 13th Judicial District, 9th Judicial District, which is McPherson and Harvey County.
McPherson County.
Okay, so once this takes place, I know that times were different than now, but was it a big learning curve? I mean, you're now appointed to this position as a judge, and that comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility, right? Mm-hmm. Do you feel like everything that you had done up to that point had prepared you properly for that position, or were you caught off guard by maybe some of the things that they have to do that you just weren't aware of? Well, or maybe even the toll that it takes on you as an individual making these kind of decisions, maybe.
Well, it was kind of a mixed situation. First of all, Kansas courts are courts of general jurisdiction, meaning they handle everything. There's no specialization in. Now you go down to the big metro areas like Wichita, Kansas City. They will have divisions of court where you just handle civil cases, or just handle criminal cases, or just handle domestic cases. But in a smaller district like we have, or actually mid-sized. I mean, you go out west, there's some really small counties that don't have a. But we're all general jurisdiction. We all handle everything, all the way from small claims to multi-million-dollar lawsuits and speeding tickets to murder trials. So you have to be a generalist. A lot of the areas I was already familiar with: domestic work, divorces. I'd handled a number of divorces, so I knew that. I'd handled a number of civil cases, so I felt comfortable with it. I'd spent time in the county attorney's office as an intern. Actually, while I was still in law school, actually, that was the summer I was running for the legislature. I'd also spent time in the county attorney's office, and I'd been a defense attorney. In fact, I tried a rape case in here, and as a defense attorney. So I felt comfortable knowing the area. It wasn't like I hadn't just been working in a law office and I had never been in a courtroom before. I'd spent a considerable time in a courtroom. So I felt confident I could do it. The thing about it is that you just have to, and without any research help, you have to prepare yourself on cases. A lot of stuff in court, it's like a lot of jobs. You earn 90% of your pay on 10% of the cases and earn 10% of your pay on 90% of the cases. 90% of it was signing my name, holding a routine hearing where things had either been a plea bargain had already been worked out. But the other 10% were the trials, the motion hearings that were contested, and the nasty divorces and the child custody hearings, and those were very stressful kinds of things. A lot of it is just preparing yourself, taking time to study the issues, but some of it's just kind of routine kind of stuff where in some cases you really don't have a lot of discretion on what to do. So I felt reasonably prepared, and the thing about being a judge is you have to be, first of all, you have to be a good listener, and then the best thing you do is be willing to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. Even if it's something you don't have any discretion on, people need to understand, what the law is that requires you to do what you're doing. And just because when I practiced law, sometimes with one particular judge, we'd go in and I'd win or I'd lose, and I had no idea why, because he wouldn't explain himself. And if win or lose, you can't explain to your client if you get a ruling for or against you, and the judge doesn't even take the time to explain what's going on and why he or she is ruling the way they are. Nobody feels good.
And you're not being much of a public servant in that case. I mean, you are. Well, you're filling your role, but if I don't know, you kind of mentioned it. You take the time to try to help people understand.
Absolutely.
And you felt that was something you should do in your role, your official capacity.
Most people don't have that much interaction with the judicial system. Maybe jury duty once or twice in their life. Maybe if they have a dispute with somebody in a small claims matter, or if they're a landlord, if they have to file. But most people are only in court once or twice, and so they're going to form their opinion about the whole justice system based upon those one or two times. Yeah. So if you treat things as just casual or unimportant, people are going to think, what kind of a system do we have here? So you've got to try to be a very good listener and then explain things. Judges' jobs are pretty simple. You have to make a decision. People come to you wanting to win, obviously, but that's your job. Yes or no, guilty or not guilty, granted or denied. That's your job, is to make a decision on things which, if people could make a decision themselves, they wouldn't be in court, yeah. Right? So that's your job. So it's very simple to say, okay, you win and you lose. But that's really not very helpful. People have to understand why you made that decision. Yeah. And if you have discretion, which judges do on a lot of different things, although some things they don't, but if you do have discretion, why are you exercising it, and why are you making the decision? What are the factors that are causing you to make the decision the way you are? Because if people don't understand that, then, okay, we won, but I don't know why we won, or we lost, and I don't know why we lost. That's the major. There are lots of studies on this. The major dissatisfaction of courts is when they don't take the time to explain what they're doing, and they treat people as the same way you get treated at the counter at McDonald's at noon on a busy day. Yeah. So, here's your order.
So that would
a
be
lot
like,
of what we do is McDonald's like, in the sense that we move stuff through. and if you treat it as just routine and impersonally, that's not a good feel.
Yeah, and then it's always I would think that having that job, serving the community in that way, would be very difficult. My personal opinion, simply because you're where the buck stops 9 times out of 10. I mean, the decision has to be made. You have to make the decision. You make the decision, and you have to live with that decision, right?
Well, so do doctors.
Yeah.
All kinds of people have to. So do police officers. So do fire personnel.
Yeah.
Lots of people have to make life or death decisions. Most of the time, our decisions aren't life or death, but they do impact people's lives. But many people have those kinds of jobs, and so if I'm going to do shoddy work on making a car part, maybe somebody's going to die as a result of that, and I never know about that. So if you care about your work, then it affects people if you do the best you can. Yeah, it's sometimes very unpleasant. One of the reasons I decided to retire when I did is I had a whole series of really nasty, difficult divorce cases, and I would get angry because when people are fighting over their children, they don't realize how much they're hurting them, and yet I had to fight with my own anger. Can't you people see that you're hurting your children? I mean, why are you fighting? It
ain't about you right now. Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah,
as far as they're concerned, it's about my rights. I got my rights. Well,
so that's interesting.
But you're poisoning your children. I mean, okay, your rights are poisoning your children.
Okay, so you said a string of this. It's interesting that you honed in on that, because I was anticipating you to say that there was just a rash of. We've had times in our community's history where there's some pretty big things that happen pretty close together, and I'm thinking, wow, that could really test a person, to have to deal with all this, but you went to the family and divorce cases and children.
Oh, sure. Criminal cases, first of all, some of them are, I've had some that were really gut-wrenching, involving death, particularly the death of children, particularly people who commit violent sex crimes and scar people for life. Child molestation is obviously, and the stakes are really high in those kind of cases, because particularly under Jessica's law now, if somebody's convicted, they're going to prison of molesting young children. They're going to prison for the rest of their life. So you're making life decisions here. Well, actually, the jury usually makes those decisions. So, but criminal law tends to develop kind of there are patterns that develop, and I didn't, even though the majority of cases in courts are criminal cases, I didn't find those, with a few exceptions, the 7-week murder trial of the high school drama teacher. That was dramatic because the attorneys made it into a soap opera primarily, although it wasn't that complicated a case, but the attorneys made it into a soap opera. But the parents who continually fight, and the children who are the victims of the parents fighting, that's what really would get to me, because there were so many of them, and sometimes it seemed so intractable, and particularly there were some lawyers, but some lawyers who would just feed on that. That was how they would, the more they fight, the more they got paid. I called it the jukebox theory of law. Money keeps coming in, and the noise keeps coming out from the attorneys. So, and some attorneys encourage that kind of thing. Not many, but those are harder to me than because of the emotions that are involved. Actually, with a few exceptions, criminal cases aren't really all that emotional. The ones involving when you've got family members who have lost loved ones or have been, sexually assaulted or something like that. Yes, you get some of that. But a lot of possession of methamphetamine, we get lots and lots of drug possession cases, aggravated burglary. There are a lot of things which are are
like non-person crimes, basically.
yeah, particularly non-person crimes, and there are a lot of those, and drug crimes,
yeah.
and that
like there's no victim necessarily
Yeah.
except yourself. You know,
there are a few very high-profile, very difficult criminal cases, but the majority of them are I wouldn't say routine, but they don't involve high emotion in the same way that the personal attacks do. And fortunately, here we have not had a tremendous amount of those. Although we always accused Sedgwick County of dragging the bodies across the line because they.
Yeah. That seems
we
to
seem
be,
to get a lot of stuff that kind of originated in Sedgwick County.
Yeah, that then finds its way here.
It finds its way here.
They seem this is the country, they think.
And having an interstate highway, which is just a few hundred yards away, is like having an open sewer in your neighborhood because right now, if you went up and stopped 10 cars, probably at least one or two of them would have drugs in them.
Yeah.
And if they're stopped for a tag light out, you're on a drug dog around, you got an arrest, and
you got to prosecute them.
You got prosecution, and so that's one of the reasons we have. And Newton has always been very aggressive about prosecution and highway drug enforcement.
Yeah,
and which I have no qualms with that, particularly because we used to have a lot of meth lab cases where people would get rock salt and acid,
like everything to make it,
and
right?
Sudafed,
Yep.
yeah. But then they made it. I mean, if you want to buy a box of Sudafed at the pharmacy, I mean, you're going to do everything but a pat down search.
Yeah, nowadays, right? They need an X-ray.
So it's very difficult to get the materials, but the labs in Mexico make it in huge quantities, and they just load it onto mules and send it on the Highway 35 up our way. And so we don't have many drug lab cases anymore, but lots and lots of methamphetamine cases, mostly because small quantities or people that get stopped out on the highway.
Yeah. They're taking it up.
Taking it up north.
The pipe.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that you say the sewer pipe. There's so many times that I've heard Kansans refer to the interstate system as the sewer pipe, especially law enforcement out in western Kansas, small communities. They'll most definitely sit there next to the interstate, get off and get on, and monitor. I mean, I'm going to say who's coming and going within their community and what they're doing and whatnot. And it's a way to prevent crime from coming to them, which otherwise wouldn't, unless, you have the road that has an exit into here.
Well, out western Kansas, because they bought pot legally in Colorado, they think it's okay to bring it wherever they want. And they cross the line in Kansas, get stopped for speeding, and they got marijuana, and they go, well, I bought it legally. Well, you're in Kansas now.
Yeah, that doesn't work that way.
Work.
You'd think you could just dump it out on the side of the road, but that's not what happens. That's a major, major crime. Okay, speaking of this, you talked about, and we are, I know, getting time, but I could talk to you forever, Judge. Moving on, and you talked about how there was when you're talking with individuals, you want to make sure that they know what's going on. And I know that ignorance of the law is no excuse, and you're still judged by the fact that you broke the law, regardless of whether you knew there was a law or not. Is there really a lot of that? In your entire, from the beginning to end, most people know generally you're not supposed to do this. I mean, it's not rocket science to know you're not supposed to go buy weed in Colorado and drive it into Kansas. It's not really an excuse. But as a lot of times people, they're just completely, and I'm not going to use ignorant in a bad way, but just don't understand the system. They don't know what's going on. They're even
people don't
wondering,
think they're going to get caught, for one thing. Like the shoplifters at Walmart and people that are breaking into people's house. They don't think they're going to get caught. It's not so much ignorance of the law, because every now and then there's something. Particularly like window tinting. There's actually laws on window tinting, and a lot of people just have these black windows that you can't see through. Well, law enforcement has to be able to see through. I've forgotten, and they actually carry with them tint meters. So if they can't see you, they can stop you and put the tint meter on, and they'll generally give you a fix-it ticket. Go get the tint removed or
lighten it up a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And people may not know that, but most things, there are not too many people that get caught up in situations where oh, I didn't know there was a law on this. Every now and then, something like that. But yeah, particularly if people move to the state and may not know about a particular law. But a lot of it, for instance, furnishing alcohol to minors. People know about that, but they let it happen all the time.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't say ignorance of the law is a problem. It's thinking, well, we're not going to get caught about this. And then they do get caught. And then, you know.
And it's usually never their first time, right? It's you know, I say that neither here nor that. I'd be putting words in your mouth. That's my opinion only. Okay, so now that we're drawing nigh to the end of the program, again, we have a time limit. I want to say again, I really appreciate the audio and this, and I encourage anybody to listen to both as far as that goes. But as always, I always leave the guest with the opportunity to speak directly to the hearts and minds of those that are listening. What do you have for us, Judge?
Well, the main thing I'd like to say is, having spent a significant chunk of my life in politics, although as a judge I was part of a nonpartisan system. What really concerns me is the open hostility to other people in politics right now. When I was in the legislature, I worked with Republicans, I worked with Democrats, we'd go out to lunch together, we'd work together on things, we'd work across the aisles. We were opponents, but we were not enemies. Now, if you're on the other side of the fence from me, not me personally, but this is the operative philosophy, is if you are on the other side, you're my enemy and I must destroy you. And that toxicity of politics is what concerns me, because once you start down that path and you make somebody your mortal enemy, it's hard to join hands and sing Kumbaya and get things done. And not that everybody has to agree on anything, but they have to, I think, embrace the principle that we're all in this together, and that we can have differences of opinions, but we've got to try to respect each other when we do that. And we can work for candidates or work against candidates. We should all participate in politics, at least to the extent of voting, make ourselves available. But just because somebody thinks differently than we do, they're not evil, and they're not the enemy. And we need to take account of their views and form our own basis, not just because I'm going to destroy you and oppose you because you think differently than I do, but because that's a vicious circle. Once it starts on one side, then it's mutual assured destruction. I will retaliate against you, and it's just it's unhealthy. And I had, my dad spent 13 years on the school board, through the heart of some of the most difficult things, school unification, where all the tiny little districts were very stressful time. But people got through that and went on, and I just don't remember the level of hostility that we have now. Certainly it's existed at the national level for a long time, then it got down to the state level, but now I see so much of it at the local level. When Dad, all the time he ran for school board, he didn't campaign, he didn't receive contributions, nor did I think any of that. Now there's money being injected into these races by the big political action committees that want a particular point of view advocated, and I just think, Supreme Court says that's all right, but I just think if we turn everything political, everything hostile, then it's tough to live together as neighbors. And I don't have a solution, but I just mourn the passing of simpler times. That's the only message I've got.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Fine. say it again. Appreciate you coming on the program.
Glad to do it.
I'm humbled that you have twice over now. Let
me put in a plug for the Kansas Oral History Project,
yes.
which is online. There are a lot of interviews on there. I've done some, including with my friend Joe Hoagland, I mentioned, and also interviewed the 30-year administrator of the Kansas court system, a man named Howard Schwartz, who's got a fascinating study at a Jewish kid from Philadelphia who comes to Kansas, goes to Emporia State University, goes out to try to find, on a Sunday morning, tries to find lox and bagels in Emporia, Kansas. And they've never even heard of them. But he spends 30 years here.
Got to make somewhere home, and this is it. We have a great home. So,
okay.
Thanks,
Lance,
everybody.
Glad to do it.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody for listening to this episode of Harvey County Talk. I was your host, Lance Gormley, and our guest was the Honorable Judge.